Hello and welcome to another Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast. Luke Taylor here. Last interview of my Napa and Sonoma soiree, and I'm fucking tired. But you know what? I figure this is the way to end it with a fellow podcaster. I'm not a winemaker. I sell the shit. And you know what people have, someone has said on this wine podcast, his good friend Michael Keenan, the easy part is making it. The tough part is selling it. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, I'm sure. I'm here at the beautiful, absolutely gorgeous Seavey Vineyards, or in, where the hell are we?
We're Napa Valley, but this is Con Valley. It's this little section of Napa Valley. Out
God's
east.
country. This is this is Napa for me. So Jim Duane's Inside Winemaking Podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And the Seavey Winemaker. And this probably the most famous Zag behind John Stockton.
We've got myself, Russell Bevan. He's another Zag.
Yeah.
And but not a lot of us came out to.
Yeah. Well, John Stockton didn't he get his season tickets revoked because he wouldn't put her mask?
I saw that in the news.
That's disappointing.
It is. He's a legend at Gonzaga.
He is a legend in Gonzaga. Grew up in Utah. Awesome, man. I'm really excited that you agreed, and hopefully you'll talk to me after this. So we got Jim Duane. Welcome to the Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this, and I'm excited that you're going to do all the editing and all the work on this one.
Well, that's what you think. Brought to you by no one, listened by no one, sponsored by no one. Even my wife and mother do not listen to this. So that's why I can swear once in a while. But, you know, my 8-year-old does listen to this, puts him to sleep, so I got to be a little bit PG. So thanks for the tour. I think every winemaker loves the Gator. I think that's the only reason you're in the wine business is to drive the Gator.
I mean, it's an opportunity to play with fun tools.
Yeah. So Seavey Winery has been around for a while. 40 acres, right?
40 acres planted grapes. The whole ranch is about 200 acres, so there's a lot of oak forest. Mm-hmm. That's part of the property.
Yeah, and good internet access.
Yeah. We are well connected to the world.
I was in the middle of driving here, and I was talking to someone, and it just dropped.
Yeah.
Which is kind of nice.
Scary part is when we had the fires come close here in September and October of 2020.
Yeah.
There were two of the Seavey brothers stayed on property to protect the place with no communication to the outside world. Thank God fire never actually came down here, but we're on an island.
And what were they honestly going to do? Not call 911.
Thankfully, I don't have to answer that question because they never had to do it. But
yeah.
I mean, putting out spot fires is a big deal. Mm-hmm. It's a it's a male thing. I hear about all sorts of men, they send their wives and their kids and their families away and they stay at their house to protect it. And you always hear the stories about, the people who live. You don't hear the stories about the dudes that never made it. But I mean, the winds were so strong that embers were blowing in everywhere. So if you could stop those spot fires, you can save a structure.
I always like to have extra baking soda on me. Maybe quote myself in baking soda. So you grew up in Utah. You studied biology at Gonzaga. So Utah, Spokane, Washington, Napa Valley.
With a year in New Zealand in between. That's right. Yeah. So I always knew that I wanted to study winemaking. So I did come out to UC Davis after Gonzaga, New Zealand. But after 4 years of sitting in college and being lectured to, I couldn't handle more school. So I had to go work.
Yeah. Good for you.
And I thought that I wanted to make wine, but I needed to go try. I needed to go see if that was real.
Yeah. And I think the best way, it's like I was telling you, my background is in television, and people go to like broadcasting, like doing masters and stuff. I'm like, no, get your butt kicked and your balls kicked in and go like work in like Dubuque, Iowa, market 126 right here, and it's probably the same thing for you. It's like carry hoses, do all the stuff that you need to do, work your 12 and 14 hour shifts. Where in New Zealand were you?
I was in Marlborough, so in the town of Blenheim, South Island, and I worked for Montana Wines, which is Brancott Estate here in the U.S.
Okay, so it's not Joe Montana Wines.
It's no. So they can't call it Montana Wines because of the name of the state. You can't have a brand with the same name as a state. So Brancott Estate, and I actually worked on the Brancott Estate. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah,
I never knew that.
But I went from sitting in the class, being a regular college kid, studying, doing all that, and then 3 months later, when I was in New Zealand, hauling rocks out of a vineyard It was just like a full contrast.
Real glamorous,
between,
huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, college is fun, right? You got all your friends, you're partying, you're working and studying. Hopefully, I actually had to study quite a bit to like keep up with everything.
Yeah.
But then a few months later, I was, with a bunch of salty guys out hauling rocks and doing manual labor. And it was a different kind of fun, but it was like that, you have to ask yourself, like, do you really want to do this? And to answer that, you got to understand what it is.
Yeah.
And so you got to go out and find out what
it's not all glamour. It's not signing balls. So let's be interested if you did. Okay. It is 2022. I once saw Vanilla Ice when I was in television. I've never seen anyone sign as many breasts as he did. And he's like, yeah, come have a drink with me. Problem is he doesn't drink. So I'm sitting there and he invite his Tommy Kwan was his GM. I don't know why we're going here, but anyway, he invited me after the show and I interviewed him earlier that day for Fox. And I've never seen anybody sign as many body parts in front of me. Like it was like this. I'm like, this is great, and all types. I mean,
so you ready to join the entourage? Get one of those word to your mother jackets? And
yeah, maybe. I mean, Tommy did tell me not to ask about his wife, because I think the 2 weeks before he threw his wife out of moving cars. We won't go there. What's the best thing you learned in New Zealand?
Oh, okay.
And it couldn't be wine. It can be wine related. Could not.
So I spent 8 months working in the vineyard, and then after the growing season, moved into the winery, which was great because I got, not just a lot of people just go and work a harvest and sort of run a pump and that sort of thing. But I got to be there in New Zealand, and New Zealand was great. I was 22 years old. It's like, if you want to go have adventure, it was an awesome place. So I worked 5 days a week, and then I was just a weekend warrior. I'd leave work at Friday and drive somewhere new every weekend and just sleep in the car, hitchhike, do whatever. It was an awesome adventure. But New Zealand was like a nascent wine community. And especially down in Marlborough, they hadn't been growing grapes that long. I think some of the first grapes were planted there in the 70s, and it was not a big industry. But it was an interesting industry because it's an export industry. So much of New Zealand's production would go to England. It was, it was a big deal in the UK.
Right.
Now it's international.
Huge.
But New Zealand didn't have this wine drinking culture. It's not like the old world where people are very proud of this.
Spain, Italy, France.
Right. It was like
Germany.
So for a lot of people, it was jobs. It was work. And so I got to see that that's also a part of, like, you can be a part of winemaking, grape growing and winemaking in that sense, or you can be sort of the lover and like the real nerd and the geek of it and go a little bit farther. And so it was just a nice contrast for me because I'd been to visit France a bit, and coming here to Napa, I got to see how excited people were about making wine and the culture, and there was a lot of pride in their own the house where they worked or the region itself. In New Zealand, I remember I was working with this guy, and he's like, "Jim, I can make this piss all day long. I don't drink it, but I sure know how to make it." And
vote of confidence, huh?
Right.
Oh my God.
I mean, you can only have so many glasses of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, because it's such a strong flavor profile. But it's very attractive.
Yeah, cat's pee. I once said that in a wine tasting, and the whole room was just quiet. I'd never use that one again. Has anybody had cat's pee before? So it's like, okay.
So it taught me that there's levels of involvement in winemaking. There can be just a job, and then there can be a love and a passion, and there's like, it at least queued up the question to me. It's like, where do you want to fit into this industry going forward?
So it kind of solidified what you wanted to do.
Yeah. The work was hard, but I liked it.
Yeah.
I love being on my feet every day, being outside, working.
I'm surprised you're not standing up right now.
If this goes on too long, I will start nodding off, but I promise I'm going to stay.
I mean, we've had, between the two of us, we've had some interesting podcast interviews, so you can do what the hell you want. So New Zealand, then you went to where?
So then I came back, moved back to Washington, picked up my then girlfriend, now wife. We drove down. I drove my 1987 Nissan Sentra down from Washington.
Sentra.
Yeah, to Davis. No, I'm sorry. It was a Stanza.
Sentra, I remember the Stanza, first, yeah.
Yeah, Stanza. And my brother had made it this hoopty ride. It was, and the air conditioner didn't work. This was July. Nice. And I had to drive from Washington all the way down to Davis, California with the heat on full to keep the car from overheating.
At least you're not a big guy.
Yeah. that helps.
Yeah.
And so my wife and I, she had the Sentra, I had the Stanza. We caravan down and came to live in Davis so I could study at UC Davis for a couple of years before moving to Napa.
Wow.
And we got to Davis and it was 110 degrees, and my wife threatened to go back to Washington.
Yeah, and she married you.
Yeah. We got through those first 2 days at 110 degrees.
You know you could get through anything. She's a keeper. She's a keeper. So UC Davis, intimidating? Not intimidating?
It was intimidating.
Because it seems like it's really a who's who of the wine industry in California. Let's be honest.
Yeah, and I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't have a technical background in winemaking. I'd worked in New Zealand for a year, but I didn't know wines of the world. You know, a lot of people come into wine through restaurants, you know, being servers and bartenders, and then you get a chance to taste wines, and a lot of people sort of develop their love for wine that way, where I was just too young. I didn't have much of a chance to. I tasted a lot of wine in New Zealand, but that means you're tasting a bunch of Sauvignon Blanc, some nice sparkling, which actually most people don't know about, and then a little bit of Pinot Noir. But I just assumed everyone knew more than me, and some people did. But it was a master's program, so it was just 15 people in that group. And so it was a really small, tight knit group, and so that was very welcoming.
Do you keep in touch with any of them?
Almost everyone, yeah. There's actually a guy that I haven't seen since I was at Davis out here last week came to visit me, but he was working for Gallo when he went to Davis. They put him through school. He did the same program and an MBA at the same time. We almost never saw him because he was always studying. But a couple of years ago, he was running the whole Carlo Rossi program, which is, I think, the single biggest wine SKU in the world. But now he runs their winemaking and their distillation. And so there's a real, it's kind of cool to see that dichotomy of where people landed.
Yeah. So you graduate UC Davis with a master's. Did you have to do any internships or anything like that during that?
Not till after.
Okay.
Right. So then after, I took an internship at Robert Mondavi Winery in Oakville.
Okay. I've never heard of him.
Yeah. But I wanted to go there because I was attracted to the vineyards. They have Tocolone.
Oh, yeah, obviously.
And that was just...
Yeah.
I wanted to make Cabernet, and I was like, well, this would be a great place to start.
Yeah. So what's the process? You're in school. Do you just do they just have is there a website, or is there the UC Davis have a website where they have different internships? What is the process?
They do. There's this, and I get through my podcast, which is kind of technical winemaking. I get a lot of people ask, how do you find jobs? And UC Davis has this bulletin board, Ven Jobs, that lists all the jobs. But they also had old school job fairs. And that's how I found the job at Mondavi. They just came. They had a little booth.
Really?
And you just go booth to booth. And it was I think...
Do they have wine at the booth?
No.
That's pathetic.
But it was right next to the Marquesan booth, I remember. And I didn't know what Marquesan was at the time. And Helen Turley was there. I maybe knew of her, but I didn't recognize that was her.
She was at the job fair, the career fair. Helen Turley.
And I was talking to her. She was super nice, but I had no idea it was Helen Turley at the time. And it was just kind of this tiny little winery I'd never heard of. So I was like, not so interested. So I went to Mondavi, the booth next door, and they were super cool and excited. And I was like, all right, let's hook up with these guys.
Oh my God. So you just kind of blew off Helen Turley.
Yeah, hopefully I was polite and just came off as naive because it was true naivety. So
Right. Oh. That's awesome. So you're Robert Mondavi for a little bit of time, and then is that where you ended up? And then you were there full time, right? Did you get a job there?
So I started there in 2004 when it was family run. It was a publicly held company, right? Family run, but during that harvest is when Constellation had that takeover. Oh, and it was pretty ugly, pretty hostile. Oof. I remember Tim Mondavi getting up and gathering all the employees and said, we're going to try and hold on to the winery. And ultimately, I think it was probably just came down to finances where they couldn't match the $1.1 billion offer from Constellation. And so I was kind of watching, I'd been out in the world in a real job for 2 months and already I'm seeing this corporate takeover.
You're like, this does not look good for my chances, honey.
So I only worked there for a few months and then had an opportunity to go and be the enologist at Stag's Leap Wine Cellars.
Nice.
And so that was a real exciting opportunity. Okay. So I left and went there and spent the next 7 years at Stag's Leap.
Okay.
And that was Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. It was at the time I went, it was family owned by the Winiarskis, Warren Winiarskis.
I'm seeing a common trend with you.
2 years later, there was the corporate takeover. Although St. Michel Wine Estates was, they were a dream compared to sort of that hostileness I saw at Mondavi.
Yeah.
But also it was super cool because that change of ownership was St. Michel Wine Estates partnering with the Antinori family. And the Antinoris were super cool. And that was great to have the influence of Renzo Cottarella there and all just coming in and really being a part of our technical team. That was awesome.
Did you learn probably the most, maybe even more than grad school, just learning on the job with him and some of these other people that you had kind of on speed dial per se?
Absolutely. I mean, any university college program is a study of science and how things work, but you have to go work to understand practicality and how to work in the cellar and how to work logistics and all those things. So, Stag's Leap was kind of my university of actually learning how to make wine.
Your doctorate.
Yeah.
Your doctorate.
Right.
All right, let me try. You can watch me drink since you're not drinking, unless you want to drink with me.
I'm going to, so start there on your left. So that's the 2017 Merlot. We're drinking the Seavey wines here.
Okay. We're eventually going to talk about Seavey.
Okay.
This is a 6-part podcast. I didn't tell you that, right? Better tell your wife and kids you'll be home at 8:30 tomorrow. So Seavey, tell me a little bit about the Merlot and tell me a little bit about Seavey.
Sure.
And how long you been here, first of all? You're at Stag's Leap, not a hostile takeover.
Nope.
Seavey has not been taken over.
Seavey's still family owned. Very excited about that. Good. So I came here in 2011. Started right before the harvest of 11, which was kind of like jumping into the deep end because it was a real challenging year. It was like stepping into a different portal in coming here. Stag's Leap Wine Cellars was probably about 100,000 cases back then. Focused on the estates, which were right behind the winery there in Stag's Leap District, and then the Artemis program is their Napa Valley cabs. We were sourcing grapes from all over the Napa Valley, so I got to drive all over Napa Valley, and that was super cool as just an opportunity to see vineyards and to learn vineyards. So then come here to Seavey, where it's one site. So it's this ranch, all grapes,
and it's like you're like I told you, you're transcended in time.
Right, for sure. Yeah, you're going back 20 years in time when you step onto the property. It's old school, it's rugged, it's rustic, and it just clicked. It's just, I feel very comfortable here. It's quiet, it's beautiful. It's hard to farm grapes here because we're on hillsides. And we just took the drive through the vineyards so you can see all the different
topography. Drove and you told me I had to walk. I'm a little bit exhausted here. I'm going to have to drink more. I'm just kidding. Where's the food? God.
Well, there's no talking when you're walking up the hills because as you saw, they're real hills.
Yeah, well, you showed me the one. It's like, and the boulders, they just had to leave them there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So it's a tough spot to grow grapes. Grapes tend to do well where they struggle, but it's a really special place to grow Cabernet Sauvignon. And the cabs that we make are kind of like, not represent, but they portray the ruggedness of the property. So we make a little bit of Merlot, which you're tasting now, and then we'll get into the cabs. But the house style is a bit rustic, or maybe rugged is the better way. We have big tannins, big structure. There's the not fruit-driven wines, they're definitely more earth-driven wines. And that's just kind of the terroir. Like I've messed around with different levels of ripeness here on the property over time, and the site is so strong that even the heavy hand of winemaking doesn't really show through. So kind of the terroir, like the flavor profile that often sets Seavey apart is a bit of like iron, like a minerality of iron, and sometimes smoke, which before all the fires were an issue, that was just a word we kind of threw out willy-nilly, but now we're a little bit more careful. But in for a long time, like Robert Parker, who kind of put this property on the map in the 90s when he first started coming out, would often describe the wines as having like a scorched earth flavor or smoke. And it's not from the barrels necessarily. Right. It's just part of the grapes here.
Yeah. Robert Parker Jr. said Seavey is one of the great unheralded, under-the-radar terroirs in Napa Valley. How much that cost you guys? Oh, no, that's not Wine Spectator, my bad.
That helped in a big way.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because he came out in the early 90s when, so the brand first started in 1990. Bill and Mary Seavey were planted some grapes in the 80s, were selling those off, and slowly started keeping grapes for themselves. Started the brand in 1990. And they were not a sales-driven business.
Right.
But when Robert Parker showed up, sat down at that front room and tasted with Bill and Mary, liked the wines, said some really nice things, and that kind of put Seavey on the map, and that brought customers in.
Yeah. Who were some of the wineries you guys sold grapes to back in the 80s?
So we were mostly selling Chardonnay in the 80s.
Really?
And so I think it was KJ. I know Raymond in St. Helena purchased some grapes. So it was more Chardonnay planted here than we have now.
Really?
Yeah.
When did you guys kind of switch over to the economic factor of Cabernet?
Yeah, there's not great records on that, but I know in probably after 85 to 90, there was more and more Cabernet being planted. Some of that was sold. I'm not sure exactly who that was going to, but then Bill Seavey wanted to start his own brand. And so in 1990 was the inaugural vintage.
That's good.
But they're big wines, big in structure. So we were known
that was a really nice Pinot. That was good.
So we're known as having age-worthy wines, and that's really true. And we try, and that's why we're tasting all the way back to 2012 here.
Oh, really?
We don't pour current release wines. They just don't show as well as if we were to go back. So you had the 17 Merlot, which was exciting because 17 picked all the grapes before any of the fires started, so got everything in clean and healthy, and we were able to make all the Merlot we had on the property.
Right.
We lost some of the Cabernet to smoke.
Yep.
So it was a rough year, but
yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Merlot is it's not big in fruit. It's
how much of an alcohol? What's the alcohol content?
It's about 14.5, 14.8.
So 18.
Yeah. Oh, 18%.
Yeah, 14. Because don't you have like a 1%?
1.5% there.
Don't you love when people say like it's funny? They'll come up to me and they'll say, "What's the alcohol alcohol content?" I'm like, really? I'm like 14.2. Well, now I need something bigger. I'm like, and it was a female, and I wanted to say to her, "You go look at your husband and tell me you don't know what big is." But you can't say that because the customer's always right.
Yeah, I'm very cognizant of alcohol levels as I'm picking grapes, and it's something that's always not in the back, but at the forefront of my mind, because we don't want to make wines at 15.5 and 16%, which we can do because we have hillsides. Because the heat shows through. Yeah. And I don't want the wines to get out of balance.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, do you have, since your last name's not Seavey, I apologize, as mine's not Seavey either, do you have kind of total control of the stylistically you want to go winemaking wise? Or is there something like, hey, we want to see this, or like how does that work when it comes to maybe ownership, family to yourself?
This is a great question. And those are some of the first questions I had back in 2011, because that was not made clear right up front. I spent a lot of time in the vineyards with Bill Seavey asking these questions, and it was clear that he wanted a great wine from this property, but he wasn't articulating a style. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll go back through the wines and identify the style for myself. But then we continue to work with Philippe Melka. So Philippe Melka was winemaker here.
Heard that name before.
1995 till 2000.
Oh, he was wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so after 2000, then he started his own, consulting business, but he's worked with us since 1995. So that second week, Philippe came, and he was the one that really communicated to me the style of what Seavey is. And he has that background of all those vintages. I mean, he even blended the 1993. So he understands the property as well. Yeah.
So who was here between you and Philippe?
Oh, there are a number of
Really?
winemakers. Yeah.
Couldn't hack it, huh?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
There were challenges.
Yeah.
But the style, it can be hard for me to articulate style, because when you're extreme, then it's easy. When you're on like the real low ripeness and you want to have freshness and acidity, and that's your real driver, that's easy to articulate. Or when you're huge and big and powerful and opulent, that's
and
also
in your face, and yeah.
But it's hard to articulate. Like, what do you find that middle ground without sounding boring, because you don't want to sound like you're a 5. That's it's a boring thing. But really what we're trying to balance, I think this is probably the way I think about it, is balancing power with some elegance. We're definitely more on the power side, especially in terms of tannin and structure that wise, because of the hillsides and the thick skins and a lot of tannin. So my goal, and this was communicated to me by Philippe, is to find the elegance in there, to be really careful about canopy management in the vineyard, but be careful about extraction in the winery. Because if you have sort of conventional winemaking like you would have on flatlands in the valley, we would over-extract tannins, and the wines would be really astringent. Yeah. So we have to be super cognizant of balancing tannins and finding the elegance that's there.
Right. So you're really working with what the vineyard's given you.
Yeah. I mean, as a winemaker, you have to decide when to pick, and that's the most important winemaking decision you can make, because that's going to set your ripeness.
So you're a weatherman.
Style.
You're a meteorologist, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, you get you're
Jim
absolutely
Duane,
fixated.
MS. Jim Duane, MS.
There is fruit to the wine, but really, I think there's more earth and spice to these wines, and so to understand that, then that kind of like helps you go down the path to understanding when to pick the wines, when to pick the grapes.
Yeah. All right, what do we got now?
Okay, and so that's 17 Merlot. And Merlot for us has to show some femininity because we have really big, powerful cab. So Merlot has to show a little bit more red fruit than dark fruit. And it's its own beast, but we want it to be pretty. It's not light, but it's certainly not the powerhouse that some of the cabs are. Okay, and so then next, that's the 2012 Caravina Cabernet Sauvignon.
Oh, wow, we're going way back.
Yeah, so we're going to get to the flagship Seavey cab, but we have this other brand called Caravina, which is kind of just a made-up name, kind of a juxtaposition of two words, cara, meaning deer in Italian, and vina, vine. And so this is a wine we've been making since 1999.
Wow.
And it shows a little bit of the softer side of cab of Seavey.
That's nice.
And so originally it was sourced from some of the younger vines as we were replanting in the 90s, but now it's a brand where it's really about more fruit forward, still not a big heavy fruit wine, but more fruit,
That's
softer
beautiful.
tannins than
That's
the
really
Seavey
pretty.
cab. And these wines are more accessible to younger age, where the Seavey cab is really kind of built to be tough until it's got a few years in the bottle.
Wow.
So 2012, really nice growing season, really easy year to make wine after 2011, which was cool and
Great vintage,
difficult.
though.
I'm
11
super
was
excited
a
about the wines
great
now,
freaking vintage.
but it was a challenge. That was jumping into the deep end.
And the critics loved it.
yeah.
The hell do
I
they
thought
know,
you were
right?
serious for a second.
No, I'm not serious. I'm very sarcastic.
But I mean, mountain sites and hillside sites had a better opportunity to make good wine in 2011 because you had the drainage through the soils and you could get a little bit more ripeness.
Yeah, I love 2011. And the critics were like, "Oh, it's not, the quality's not there. You better drink it quickly. It's not going to age." I mean, I've popped some 2011s in the last 6 months and 10 years, and they still have some time.
Yeah. We poured the 2011 at our open house in May, and it was a big hit.
Yeah.
It's a wine where if you were going to have it in a vertical, you can pick it out because the profile of fruit is different from a normal vintage. It's more of a lighter red fruit profile, but it's a sexy wine.
Yeah.
So 2012 Caravina, we do blend in a little bit of Merlot and Petit Verdot into the Caravina. Forgive me, I don't have the specs on this wine here, but it's usually about 5% Petit Verdot.
I can taste it for the 5%.
Yeah. And then a little bit of
really.
Merlot in some years, but not every year.
Yeah. Does it change each year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no dogma to the blending.
It's
but
how you want to use your spice rack, right?
That's right.
Yep.
But they're pretty Cabernet dominant. They're usually 90% plus Cabernet Sauvignon.
Okay. So do you always put in Petit Verdot
Yes.
and Merlot?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, those
Here we go. Here comes the truth.
Yeah,
the
the
truth
Merlot-
inside winemaking with Jim Duane.
don't necessarily always put in Merlot into the Caravina.
Okay.
But Merlot is a great agent to soften tannins. And so when we need it as that tool, it's a great tool to.
What would you say Petit Verdot adds?
It's okay, so Petit Verdot on its own, it's a gnarly wine. It's tart. It's really tannic. It's super thick and cloying. Sometimes I get pressure questions from other people in the winery, like, can we produce this varietal Petit Verdot?
No.
I'm like, we could.
Sure, but we're not going to sell it.
I just don't know who would drink a second glass.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, and people know if they had even a first glass,
Right.
it'd be purple.
Right.
Like, hi.
I mean, there's always some masochists out there
Right.
that like to drink that. But it's a special little magic spice it does not make sense to me. But when I add Petit Verdot, so I'll build my blends, all the Cabernet blends, and Petit Verdot is the last thing I do trials on. And I dose it in small amounts. I start at less than 1%. And there's a certain point in the blending where there's not cherry and rose necessarily. That's not a part of the profile of our Cabernet. And it's not part of the Petit Verdot. But there's a certain point where you blend Petit Verdot in at a small portion and it pops. It pops cherry and it pops rose. It's one of those 2 + 2 = 7 type things. And I can't explain it. And
Canadian math.
yeah.
And I'm Canadian. 2 + 2, 7. Dad, no, it's 4. No, it's 7.
So that's my goal each year is go find it. Like,
Yeah.
what is the percentage of Petit Verdot to pop those flavors?
Really?
Yeah.
And it just depends on the year.
Depends. Yeah, exactly. Because, all of your components are different each year. And so it's just kind of fun. I'm just like, where is Petit Verdot going to land this year?
So would you say the Caravina is kind of your flagship or no? Is it the workhorse?
Workhorse, yeah. Okay. And it's what's most widely available in restaurants. And we don't do a lot of distribution, but wholesale. But it is what's more out there.
So what states do you do wholesale and distribution?
Oh, gosh. I'm not the person to know. And it's an ever-evolving list of people that are carrying us or not carrying us. I know we're in Florida now. California's the main market,
Yeah,
to be
obviously,
honest. But we do most sales direct.
Okay.
Yeah. It's hard for little producers. You know this. It's hard for producers.
I love them.
To be small like us and have a distributor that'll keep us.
Yeah. We haven't met Luke Taylor yet. Just saying. You know what? I love, and I would say a lot of my wineries, I have 3,000 like Kelowna and Chalk Hill. Laird's a little bit bigger. They're 12 or 13,000, same as Keenan. And I love selling them because I know all the people that do it. I mean, it's, I'm walking up here and you're fixing something with a screwdriver. You're fixing a door. I mean, that's what you'd see, maybe not at Laird, but you'd see that at, Corley, Monticello, or, some of these others. And it's just, if you get the right distributorship, it just makes it all the worthwhile. But it's trying to find the right distributorship, because one, if you might not find because they don't pay their bill on time, or they order a pallet and then they don't order a pallet for another 2 years. Right. So it's kind of like that. And I was joking with you, like Robert or Michael Keenan said, the easy part is making the wine. The tough part is selling it.
For sure. I mean, that's why I'm a winemaker, because God knows how. I don't know how you do it. It's so weird that people love wine. People drink wine. But
it's a cult.
Maybe it's just so many brands, so many options.
There's too many.
Yeah.
There's too many. Like, and I was telling you, you go down 29 Silverado Trail, it's like boom, 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 boom. You go to Sonoma, a little bit more spread out. Believe me, I drove, and I told you this yesterday. I drove all from Sonoma. You go to Paso, boom, 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 boom. You go Temecula. I mean, anywhere you go now, there's like hundreds of wineries. And how do you get seen? I mean, you got to make a good wine, plain and simple, and that's not easy. And then once you make a good wine, you got to make sure it's bottled right, labeled right. You got to make sure you have glass. I mean, with everything going on in the world, glass is an issue, labels are an issue, corks, everything's an issue, right? And then you have to get it out to the broader market. You got to get people to come up here, and then you got to sell it. So it's a lot of fun. I think I'm having a midlife crisis during this podcast. All right, so what's after this one? This is delicious.
Okay, so you had 12 Caravina, so now this is 16. 2016 Caravina.
Is this a current release, 16?
Well, we have it available currently. It's not the most current release. We have the 18s as the current release, but these are wines that we pour for people when they come to do a tour and tasting. It's not like a special.
So you're just trying to get rid of them because that's what the most you have in the back. Let's be honest. I know it works.
We pick. we usually do 2 Merlot. We only have the
Jim, pour
Merlot.
This one. We got too much of this. I know it works.
We did make too much 2005 Merlot. That's true.
Yeah.
We have a few cases of that left, but we like to do the two wines together. So 12 and 16. We go through a couple times a year and pull what's
2 great years,
good.
I might add.
Yeah. Yeah. But showing a little bit differently. There's I don't know. Maybe you can describe the difference because you're having the wines here, but it's nice to show a wine with a little bit more age because, one of the main questions we get is like, well, what's this going to taste like when it's older? Mm-hmm. So then to give someone a wine that's 4 years older, and it's like, well, it's like going to be a little bit different. It's going to have a stamp of its vintage, but it's going to move in this direction.
It's like going to a bar and you see 2 sisters. You see the older one, the younger one. The older one, you know what she looks like, and the younger one, you see the potential. Just like wine.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Hopefully my wife's not listening to this one. Love you. They're both delicious. This one's a little bit tighter. Not by much.
Yeah. And we tend not to pour the 18, even though that's available for sale, because it's so tight.
Yeah.
It's just not very expressive at this point in time.
Yeah.
And in general, the Seavey wines, especially the flagship Seavey Cabernet, is just super tight for the
You're
first 5 years.
pouring me a 2008, aren't you? That's a current release.
We're going to do 2014.
Okay, there we go.
Right.
So how do you decide what to pour for people? Because
we just taste.
Okay.
We just sit down and taste. And we know our inventory, but we want to know what's tasting great now, what's really showing well.
How old of a stuff do you have to sell? Just out of curiosity. Everything?
We stopped selling 99 last year, and
Holy
I think
crap.
we're back to 2000s now.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah. But
you know who else is like you that does the same thing? Guess.
Well, I know there's Spring Mountain. They have a great deep cellar.
Who else?
There's not many.
There's one other that I had on the podcast.
Who?
Done.
Oh, okay, right.
So I interviewed Mike. Mike's awesome.
Yep.
Mike's in Mexico right now. He said it's his first vacation since COVID. I would have seen him yesterday. But we were talking. He's like, come on, I want to give you a couple bottles. I'm like, fantastic. So, he gives me a couple bottles. And I'm like, well, you got some old stuff. He's like, you want something? It's like, I'll sell you, give you a trade discount. I'll give you these 3 in if you want to buy them. So I bought an 05, my wedding, 09, 13, and 15. So 3 of my kids, 9, 13, 15. I think he gave me the 15. But I'm like, this is cool as hell.
Yeah.
Because I think the biggest problem people have is, if they want to remember a special year, whether it's their birth year, which, you're not going to have a 1976, which is fine. You might pour it if I came back because you want to get rid of it. But I think people miss certain windows, and it's nice that you have some of that stuff that you can sell. Because let's be honest, you're going to sell it eventually.
Yeah, right.
We
better.
Well, yeah, that too.
so originally, Bill Seavey was holding back 20% of every bottled vintage, ostensibly for himself.
20%.
20% from day
so
one.
3,000 cases. So he was keeping 600 cases.
Okay, so 5 years ago, our general manager sat down and did the math. And in his 80s, which is hard to drink a lot of wine in your 80s, he would have had to drink a bottle on the hour, every hour, 24 hours a day for 3 years to get through the inventory.
Where would he keep it all?
Oh, we have a little bit here on site,
Yeah.
just a few bottles of each vintage, but we store it off site where it's in good climate controlled
That's
warehouses.
crazy.
Yeah. But it turned out to be an asset for us, especially because it maybe wouldn't be the same if we were kind of more of a fruit forward, less structured wine where the wines didn't age so well, but the wines have always done really well with time. So, but I got to tell you my Mike Dunn story. So when I started my podcast, he was episode 3 for me. This is back in 2014. And I'd been up there and I met Mike and I just get along with him really
You've been doing
well.
it that long?
Yeah.
Wow. Rockstar.
Yeah. And so we sat down, we got our microphones, we're talking, and then 15 minutes in, the weed whacker starts right out the window. And so then it's really distracting, and so I look at Mike and I'm, giving him the wink, and he looks out, he opens the door, Randy, shut off the fucking weed whacker.
And it's his dad. Yeah. So we had him, we're doing, I don't know if you remember as much, but he has a picnic table. And it was weird because I filmed it like this. And the camera's like that because my dumbass didn't realize it's not freaking flat ground and everything. So all of a sudden he's talking and he's like, yeah, there goes Randy with his 2 bum hips, just 2 fixed hips, just going for a walk. And there's just Randy Dunn just walking up there.
I did another podcast with both of them a couple of years after, but Randy said no, but Mike convinced him to do it. So he actually sat down and talked to us. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk about your podcast a little bit before we drink. So Inside Winemaking, you've been doing it for a long time. Probably you started before even podcasting. Sure.
Yeah. I started not long after I was working here because I was alone. So I started listening to podcasts and then, wasn't long after that.
Because there's like nobody here, right? Like if you fell over, no one's going to help you.
It's pretty quiet.
Yeah, it is pretty quiet. It's very relaxing, very therapeutic. So who would you say is your favorite guest you've ever had?
Well, we were talking before we recorded about John Caldwell.
Yeah.
Because I was not prepared for that. And he's
I don't
think
anybody can be prepared. Well, mine's Robert Kamen.
Yeah. And you said that episode's coming out soon, right? I can't wait to hear that.
It's you got to get him on your podcast. You got to get him on your podcast. And if I got to connect you, I'll connect you with his GM. She's awesome. Who was the toughest podcast you had? Was it John Caldwell?
No, I mean, that was weird because he thought I was a reporter doing a blog, like writing a blog, and it was halfway through that he realized I was recording audio, which just kind of made it funny. But we had a great time, and I really like John.
Yeah.
The hardest people are just kind of like some of the nerdy, introverted winemakers like me that are very good at and skilled at their work, but not necessarily.
They're not the face of the winery. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
One guy I had that was super cool was Dave Finney. So I think it was back in 2015. My friend works with him.
Never heard of him before.
And so I had interviewed her because she's a viticulturist. And then she's like, oh, do you want to interview Dave? And I was like, well, yeah, of course. And so I go down to the office. I sit down. They take me to his office. I don't think he has an office. I know he didn't have a computer. He doesn't do email or didn't back then. He's a phone guy. And so they take me to this office. He sits down. He's got a John Deere hat on. Sits down and goes, what's a podcast? And I was like, okay, well, it's just us talking and it's going to be recorded and then it's available on the internet. That's what it is. And he was like, cool, what do you want to know? And so we just talked and he was super casual. He was great, told me his whole backstory, and he was just very transparent and honest and it was fun. And
I've heard a lot of good things about him.
Yeah, he's such a cool guy.
Yeah, that's hilarious. You got him on the podcast. And that would have been kind of around when he sold, or no?
So it was
he sold before that.
After he sold Prisoner, this was while he was still running Orange Swift.
Okay.
Before he had sold Orange Swift or Locations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now I'm actually buying some fruit from him. So I buy Pinot Noir from the Our Lady of Guadalupe vineyard down in Santa Rita Hills in Santa Barbara County.
Really?
And that's not for Seavey, but that's for some of the wines I'm making with Naked Wines.
Okay. So what's Naked Wines?
So Naked Wines is a company. It's it was actually originally based out of London.
Okay.
And it's a platform that doesn't make its own wine, but provides support for independent winemakers like myself to make wines.
Cool.
And then the wines aren't open; they're not on the open market, but they get sold to the members of Naked Wines.
Really?
And they have like 300,000 members in the U.S. Yeah, it's I think the 20th biggest winery in the U.S.
Seriously?
now, really growing big. But they're awesome. They give people like me a chance who don't want to start a winery and a business, a chance to make my own brand, my own wines with them, and not have to worry with sales and marketing and compliance, plus money.
Yeah.
It's their money that I get to play with, which is
really
fun.
And then you just get a percentage or something like that.
Yeah, and then they just have sort of fees that they...
Right.
But it's awesome. It's a perfect setup for someone like me
So
that wants to be a winemaker, and that's all.
Yeah. So do you do it every year? Or do you just kind of pick and choose? How does it work?
So I just started with them a couple of years ago. I had my first wines released last fall. So fall of 2021, got a rosé of Pinot Noir from Monterey County.
Okay.
And then a Grenache from Paso Robles from my friend Randy Heinzen's family vineyard. So that's what I started with. And then 2021, I also crushed some Pinot Noir from Santa Barbara County, including some of the fruit from Dave Finney's vineyard, Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is a kind of this spectacularly cool new vineyard down in Santa Barbara County, right on the line of Santa Rita Hills.
Cool. That's awesome.
I mean, it's steep and it's sloped, and like it's Pinot Noir, a little bit of Chardonnay, and then where it's too steep to have grapes, it's avocados.
Okay. That's really cool. Really cool. So we do a bonus section on our Patreon page called Sip and Spit, and I kind of want to do it on the main section. So I'm going to ask you 6 questions. Okay. We're going to drink this.
Okay, you got your 14
tell me
CV
about
cab.
the 14 CV cab quickly, and then I'll ask you questions.
This is the flagship wine that
and then we'll talk
winery was
about
built on.
that too, since it's sitting there and looking at me.
Sure. So 2014, this was... This is an expressive wine. This is the irregular CV wine that's kind of open and
The
showing.
smell doesn't suck.
Yeah. But that's because of the drought. So 13, 14, and 15 were drought years for us. And so the wines... They
Sound like a married man. Well, I say that loud. We're kind of a marriage podcast too.
You're saying that there's years of non-drought then?
Yeah, how long you been married for?
I'm 16 years, so we're pretty
I'm
close,
17,
right?
yeah. Hey, honey.
The drought years are the baby years.
Yeah.
I had a child in 2014, so
Yeah, there you go.
It was a drought year.
How many you got?
2 girls.
Yeah. How old?
7 and 12.
7 and 12. Oh, wow. Yeah. So I got a 12, 8, and 6. Yeah,
Okay.
that's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah. Last time my wife came with me alone to Napa was when, 9 months before Jack was born. So we'll just leave it at that. All right. So we're going to go into this. So 6 questions. It might be 7 because I might add one. This is a sip and spit. You win nothing, you get nothing. It just maybe look at yourself.
I'm sorry, sip and spit?
Sip and spit. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a quick question. You're going to give me a quick answer, which never happens. I've had multiple people that have done this section on our Patreon site that have said this is the toughest interview. So,
okay.
Varietal that best describes you. Exactly. I saw your eyes.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, exactly. Prepare for this shit. And you can use some of these questions. I mean, you'll blow some people's mind on your podcast. I have no problem.
Okay, I'm going to go with Grenache.
Grenache. Why?
I'm learning Grenache right now because I've got 2 years of
You are
experience.
kind of fruity a little bit.
Yep, I'm fruity, but Grenache can be a little bit hard to reach. I'm learning. I'm trying to learn what Grenache is. It's a spice box, but I love in France, Gigondas and Bancaris, where they're sometimes it's Grenache and other times it's blended like a GSM, but it's high acid, it's fruit, but it can be big tannin, but it's this ruby colored light wine. So it's a mystery to me.
Yeah.
And I'm 42 years old. I'm still trying to figure out my own life.
Yeah.
But,
Wait till you turn 45. It's called midlife crisis. I think I had one on the podcast.
I bought a truck last year, so I'm starting that.
Yeah, nice. Favorite Napa wines or winery not named Seavey?
Okay, Mondavi will always be one of my favorites.
Even though it's not the family.
Yeah, it was my first experience
Hostile
in Napa.
takeover.
But people forget that Mondavi owns the biggest portion of Tokelon,
Yep.
which is this spectacular vineyard.
Yep.
They have great assets in terms of vineyard.
Yeah. All right. Give me another one.
Oh,
let's piss off some of your friends.
Yeah, let's piss off all my friends here. That's a good one. Do you know Farella down in Coombsville?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
It might be one of the few wineries that's smaller than Seavey.
Okay.
Tom Farella owns and runs the place. It's more of not a lighter style, but a lower ripeness style.
Okay.
And so those wines they're not real popping right up front, but if you wait 5 years, they're such awesome wines. They make a bit of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. I just love those wines. Not many people know of them.
Okay. That's a safe answer. You didn't piss any of your friends off. Mm-hmm. If someone made a wine about you, what would it be called and what varietals would be in it?
About me?
Yeah, like a blend. Duane blend.
Oh.
Never been asked that before.
No.
Oh, I got more great questions. I would blow your mind.
I would say at this point, I'd be open to them breaking some barriers and blending in some whites with reds.
Ooh, so what would you put in there?
Okay. Not Sauvignon Blanc, but I think if you were to dose a little bit of Gewürztraminer into certain red varieties, you got to be careful, not too much. But you can pop certain fruit with Gewürztraminer because it is so, floral and fruity. But I'd be excited about a real cool red blend. But I'd want to do something that people would say, oh, you can't do this. Like people don't do that. They don't blend these white grapes into that. Sure, there's co-fermentation of Viognier with Syrah. That's not pushing the boundaries. I'd want to have someone. You said other people are making this, right? Not myself.
No, or you can make it. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, let's get a little bit weird. But
okay.
I think
naked wines, baby.
If you just take the time to taste through and like a lot of time to taste through all these different trials and iterations of these different blends, you're gonna find something that's interesting and exciting.
Yeah, 1% Viognier.
No, we gotta get weirder.
I know. Okay, 1.5% Viognier. What would you call it, or what would it be called?
Oh man, that's the hardest thing. Like how many names are not trademarked at this point?
I know,
time?
isn't that crazy? I have two. I know of two wineries that I work with, and I work with about 30, 35 different wineries, and I know of two that have had cease and desist.
Yeah.
In 11 years. One was the Armani family. The winery is called Corte Armani, and is a cease, so they changed it to Corte Armano. Like seriously? Yeah.
Hexagon.
Heck, you call it Hexagon?
Yeah.
Really?
I really love that shape.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like the base of biological structure. It's very tied to nature. It's good to look at.
Yeah. least you didn't call it like tripod or something. All right.
But I'm sure someone's already trademarked that. So, you know.
I don't know. Favorite vintage, least favorite vintage?
16 was my favorite vintage.
Okay. Why?
It was... Okay, we're coming out of the drought. After 15, in the winter of 15, early 16, we actually had rainfall. The soil profiles filled up. It was like we're going in with some water, like we're going to have potentially good growing season, but it was an early season. It's kind of like where we are now in 2022, where it's a real threat of an early bud break. And we had that in 16. And then I thought, oh shit, like early bud break means early harvest. And there's a number of reasons I don't like that. And we can go into that if you want to. But
no, you're good.
We got there and we were just on that path through all of our farming, and then July cooled down. The latter half after variation, July cooled down, August cooled down, and it slowed down ripening. We were actually able to not have to pick in early September, but we got into October. So grapevines and grapes got a real good chance to hang on the vine and ripen. And I'm not someone that pushes ripeness into ridiculous levels. I'm like we talked about alcohol. I'm watching that. But we just got great development of flavor and softening of tannins. And it's a shame in some ways, but the best vintages are the easiest wines to make. So when you go in 2011 and you work your ass off,
best vintages
and it's
are
hard,
the easiest wines to make. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, you really can't F it up, right? I mean, I've heard a winemaker say that. Like in the best vintages, if you F it up, you shouldn't be winemaking. Right. Least favorite vintage. Or toughest?
2020.
Yeah.
2020 was hard. 17, we had to deal with fires and smoke. I had to evacuate my house in the middle of the night in October. So I got to move my house during
with 2 young
harvest.
kids. That's got to be a blast.
And my mother was there at the same time visiting.
At least you didn't say your mother-in-law. No offense to my mother-in-law. She doesn't listen either.
And so that had its own tough thing, but we'd picked most of the grapes on the ranch by October 8th. And so most of our wines were okay. In 2020, fires broke out in August. And so we really had the challenges of smoke taint. And then on top of that, like we got our usual heat spikes at Labor Day. And there were just so many challenges for that growing season.
Right.
And we picked all the grapes. We made all the wine, except, okay, that's not true. When the glass fire broke out, which was just a couple miles north of us here, just right next to where Spencer, one of my interns, was living at the time, then we had to stop picking grapes. So there were about 10 tons of grapes we didn't pick. But we made all those wines. And then so you're making these wines knowing that like most of them are never going to see a bottle. But you still got to do the work.
Right.
And that was just disheartening.
Because let's be honest, someone will buy them.
Well... In the end, we are going to have some wine. We're going to produce some Caravina for 2020.
Okay.
And I'm excited about that.
And you'll pour that in 2035.
No, the wines are light and open. I've got a sample here. You can taste it.
Welcome. I want to, for sure.
But we only make 600 cases of that. We had to sell off so much of the wine in bulk because it was just wasn't going to make a cut.
Crazy. Yeah.
But if experience is what you get when you don't get what you want, you get experience in those tough vintages. And that experience is really helpful later because you're going to have these challenges again. And if you're a winemaker, at best, you're going to have 40 vintages. So, experience is useful.
You're going to have a midlife crisis when you just made that comment. I read somewhere Shaquille said he has like 25 summers. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, 25 good summers. I'm like, oh, that's kind of creepy. So why don't you pour me this rosé of Grenache?
Yeah, sure.
But I'm going to ask you, okay, while you pour that, because maybe I'll have an epiphany. What is your epiphany wine?
I don't have that. I didn't come into wine. I know that's a shit answer to your question.
Yeah, that's a crappy
I
answer.
Come up with an answer, but
thanks.
I decided I wanted to make wine before I drank wine.
Okay.
Because I loved the work of what I thought the work was, which kind of turned out to be true. When I was in New Zealand, we could get the from the Rhone, the brand of the name of the wine was Belarus, but it was one of the what's one of the big producers in the Rhone there. It's the one with Braille on the label.
Villa Maria. No,
Gigal.
Yeah. Isn't that France?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, Rhone.
Yeah.
Belarus was the kind of that brand. It's a lower tier, kind of probably just a Rhone level wine. Get that?
I just want to see if there's Braille on the label. No.
Yeah, no. But we used to drink that in the back of our little Toyota Corolla as we were cruising around the South Island.
You cheated on Nissan, huh?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's,
That's a step up right there.
that's
the
what was in
Corolla.
New Zealand.
Yeah, hell yeah.
But I did learn to shift with my left hand.
Yeah.
Which that's
I still don't know how to drive stick, but yet I drive a forklift. Self-taught.
But that wine to me was inexpensive. I think it was about $15 back then. It was accessible. It was pretty. It was just, I don't know. To me, that opened my mind. It was like, okay, wine doesn't have to be expensive or fancy to be really, really enjoyable. Mm-hmm. So Belarus. Okay.
What is one wine you remember from maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago? Since you didn't have epiphany,
when I first came to Napa, I had a friend that grew up in Napa, and so he had some older wines, and his father was a vineyard manager, and it was part of his blood, and so he had from Etude down in Carneros. It was a Cabernet Sauvignon. So they make a lot of Pinot Noir, and that's probably what they're most known for. But they do make some cabs. But it was a 1997 Reserve Cabernet from Etude that was gorgeous, and it was like. It was layers and layers and layers of flavor. And I probably had that in 2004, 2005. So not quite 10 years old.
Okay.
But I was like, if I could make this wine, this is
happy.
what I'd want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, talk about this, and then I'm going to ask you the last question.
Sure. Okay, so this is, stay on the microphone here.
Yeah.
Territorium. This is a brand which was a collaboration that grew out of the podcast. So started the podcast in 2014, started teaching winemaking courses here in Napa in 2017. And in that first class, there was a guy named Ben Matthews came out from Cincinnati. Another guy, Cameron Laurent, came out from Denver, Colorado. They both were, sort of midlife, 30s, but very interested in winemaking. They had their own sort of corporate jobs at the time.
Cool.
And Ben was really excited about starting a brand in Ohio, in Cincinnati. So in 2018, he came out and worked with me here at Seavey for Harvest, went back to Cincinnati, and quickly thereafter developed plans to start an urban winery in Cincinnati, which, Territorium is the name of the brand. So he partnered with Cameron, who ended up moving out to California after 2018. And Ben was looking for real estate in Cincinnati and getting real close to doing that. And so then he asked me to come on board to be technical help and sourcing grapes and wines from California for that wine, the urban production in Cincinnati. Because it was, Cincinnati was blowing up with breweries and they were doing really well, but there was not a like high-end wine scene, probably wine bars and all that, but not a producer in Cincinnati at the time. I think there's one other, but he had his own vision for what he wanted to do.
That's nice.
Pandemic came and
we don't say that 5-letter word of this podcast.
Yeah. So having building a new winery,
real smart.
just got thrown out the window. And so we pivoted. We started the brand and launched in 2021, so last year.
Okay.
So now it's a virtual winery. So we're producing wines between Napa and Sonoma.
Nice.
Sourcing grapes from all over California, not Napa or Sonoma specifically. We're going for other less known regions like this. Rosé of Grenache is from El Dorado.
Nice.
And because we want to hit certain price points. We want to, be in the 20s and 30s.
So what would this sell for, this Rosé of Grenache?
I think this is $26.
Not bad.
But the cool thing with this wine is, so this is 2021 from El Dorado. It's from Starfield Vineyard. So Territorium is kind of a play off the word terroir. So we're real excited about exploring different terroir through California. Cool. And so we found an opportunity to get these grapes from Starfield Vineyard. And we went out in August. It was early August last year. And there was smoke in the air because some of the fires had started. And I think the day after we were there, the Caldor fire started and almost burned through the vineyard. But we were able to take these grapes and make wine. And this was one of the only harvests that they were able to take off the vineyard because they lost the rest of the crop after that because the fires were so close that the smoke overwhelmed it. And new smoke close to red grapes is it's a real tough prospect. So feel terrible that they lost their crop that year, but excited that at least they were able to pull some grapes off and get a little bit of revenue from the year. But able to make this wine, just made it in the most, my winemaking is pretty basic. I watch the details, but so this is, we did a little stomping, otherwise pressed it whole cluster. And for rosé, we just want something light and bright and tasty.
That is light and bright and tasty.
Have a look on the back there.
Yeah, that's cool.
We do what we call these flavor emojis on the back of all of our labels.
That's cool. Yeah.
So we pick 4 emojis that kind of show it. I think this is grapefruit, lemongrass,
strawberry, and cucumber. I can see that.
And so we have pictures which correlate to the colors on the front of the label.
That's cool.
And so people we want to represent what the wine's going to taste like on the label.
Awesome. And how could they get this?
Territoriumwines.com. Yeah.
Cool.
And we also have, we're putting QR codes on the back.
Nice.
Trying to be very accessible and open to
cool
younger generations of wine drinkers. We understand that millennials are not big wine purchasers, but they're going to age into becoming the wine purchasers.
We hope so.
Yeah. And so we want to be a part of that. So no capsule up top. Nice. We're choosing vineyards that they're either farmed organically or have some sort of certification that we have some faith that they're really taking care of the land.
Good.
And it's all part of the story of authenticity.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, last question. Song that best describes you.
Oh, Jesus. That may be the hardest one. Yeah, you wanted rapid answers.
Yeah, it's real rapid.
Let's go with American Pie, because I still don't understand that song either. I love to listen to it, but I'm not sure of the story it's telling or where it's going or where it starts and where it ends.
Nice.
But it's fun to listen to.
Good. Jim McLean. Is it Jim McLean?
I don't even know.
Yeah, I think it's Jim McLean. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
This has been fun. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for having me here. And just remember to subscribe, rate, and review. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook. And if you want to support us so I can get some cat food or gas to get back to the airport, join our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Cork and Taylor. And we will be back next week on the Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast, and we will continue to uncork the lighter side of wine.